So, hello, you guys, and welcome back to another one of these interviews. If you guys are joining us again, today I have a really special guest with the Youth Champions interviews, who's Albert. Again, as you guys have seen from the previous interviews, these kind of go through a bunch of different themes regarding the person. And today we're going to learn a bit more about Albert themselves, what they currently do, their work with Youth Champions, and any lessons that they've picked up along the way. But before we get into anything else, I want to allot some time for Albert to give an introduction of who he is.
Well, thank you so much for that. My name is Albert, and I was with Youth Champions, I think 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. And I really enjoyed my time. I think that if I had to give a summary of my life, I think it'd be kind of hard because I've done so much. I'm going to be 35 this year, and sometimes I can't even believe that if you follow my life chronologically, that all of it was really my life. It's like I feel like I have the experience of a lot of different people. So I think that I'll let some of those things come up organically. Um, I think that if I just had to summarize who I am, I really think that I'm an observer and an optimizer above everything else. Since I was a little kid, I always paid attention to what's going on around me, and then I tried to figure out how can it be done better.
Yeah. And that's a great way to wrap it up. That quick intro. I think that kind of delivers the message of who you are. And I do want to dive into some of that stuff that I know you've kind of done a bunch of things even in this short lifespan. But I want to talk about. So we're going to hit on a couple of different things, and just to kind of give a quick run through for the people who maybe are not familiar with Albert or who've known him previously, but just some previous experience that I got from looking into you. Squad leader in the Marine Corps,
Mhm.
business and vocational mentor, and then founded your own business and are currently running your own Warrior Soul Mindfulness and Combat Temple, which is something that I really want to dive into, which is more of a physical, mental training thing that I'm not so familiar with. So I'd love to
Right.
learn
Yeah.
more about that. But
Yeah.
so
I
I have
love
those four things actually just to kick it off. With the squad leader in the Marine Corps, that's something that I'd like to talk about. So if you could tell us and the viewers a little bit about where that came up in life and kind of where that interest came.
Okay. So I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17. I actually graduated high school a little bit early so I could go to boot camp. And my recruiters convinced me that if you join the reserves, you can also, because I got accepted into UC Santa Barbara, you can go to UCSB, get your degree, and then you'll become a Marine Corps officer. So I went down that path. I was in my reserve unit at Camp Pendleton while I was in school, and I completed officer candidate school. And just my personal experience just kind of shifted in many different ways while I was at school and going through all the stuff with the Marines at the time. And even though I was an honor graduate at officer candidate school, I was like the number 4 person in the company. I think we had started with about 230 people and 180 or so graduated.
Oh, wow.
And that's, yeah, at the time, that was one of like my proudest accomplishments. I can say that some of the things I learned in the Marine Corps, I still carry them today, and they're so deeply part of who I am that I forget that that's where I learned it and that other people didn't have that experience. I am, however, a huge advocate for saying that the things I learned in the Marine Corps, I do believe with the right coach and with the right environment, I could have learned them somewhere else. So I'm not saying that you have to join the Marine Corps to get certain skills. It just happened to have worked out for that way for me.
Yeah. And kind of just to piggyback off that a little bit more. So did that interest come to you at a really young age? Maybe was it a family member who had went through the same path and inspired you to do that? Or was it something that in high school you were doing research and you got reached out to and you were like, this is what I want to do and it's something that I want to go through?
Yeah, I don't really want to get too much into my Marine Corps life, if I'm being honest, but I will say that I'm a first generation American. And my mom was definitely a huge catalyst for that because she would always say things like, "Oh, this country has been really great to us, so I would be really proud if you served in the military." So my mom planted that idea in my head very young. And obviously, like, my mom also loved like action hero movies and war movies. So I grew up watching all of that, like, you know, Black Hawk Down and Tears of the Sun and this and this. And so I would like fantasize about like me being that guy, that main character that we were watching in the movie. And we're like, I could do that. That could be me. And, you know, same thing with like all the like Arnold and Jean-Claude Van Damme. I don't think maybe some of those actors are ahead of your time, right? Like, do you know who
Yeah.
Jean-Claude Van Damme is? Oh, dude, that he's like a awesome martial artist in like a lot of movies. So yeah, you know, I just kind of had that. And then I think that when the recruiters came to my school for the first time, I was like, I saw them and I was like, that's cool. Okay, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. And then it just kind of followed from there.
Okay. And I mean, there's a lot that I want to talk about. So I'll jump
Yeah.
into the second part. The From looking into your experience, you were a business and vocational mentor
Mhm.
with youth, if I'm correct.
Youth Interactive is the company.
Youth Interactive.
Mhm.
So if you could tell me a bit about that and kind of what that period of your life was.
Yeah, so it was like 2014 was when my screen printing company was probably at its peak. I was 24 years old at the time, and I had a map where I kept track of like every time I shipped to a new state, I would highlight it. And then later I was like, okay, it's hard to keep track just on a physical map. So I started using an app. And
Yeah.
so every time it shipped, it would like highlight it darker. So like California, Texas, Florida, New York, some of those bigger states, they were dark blue, you know, and then some of them were like middle, and then some were like very faint because I only shipped there like once, right?
Yeah.
But I remember the first time that I shipped to all 50 states, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm in a nationwide printer now. And I'm
Yeah.
24 years old, and I didn't go to school for business. You know, that was me just doing whatever felt right to me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even at 24, I wasn't in the same level of growth mindset that I'm in now, but I was doing enough to continue growing back then. Clearly, right? I was able to ship to the whole country.
Yeah.
And it was around that time. I don't even know what it was that triggered it. Something did. And I remember feeling like, okay, well, I'm being successful now. So what do I want to do? Because I started thinking about like my friends back home. Like I grew up in a very poor neighborhood in San Diego. And like, for example, I went to a very, very poor elementary school. Like to be honest, I didn't even know I was poor until I got to middle school. In middle school, I learned I was poor because my peers would make fun of me for being poor. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm poor. I didn't know that. You know, like I didn't even understand what brands were in middle school. So like, I was like, okay, I had never even seen like Nikes before, like, or maybe I'd seen them, but I didn't pay attention to that. Those kids not kindly, let me know, hey, you don't wear Nikes. Where'd you get those? What are those even, right? So I started doing some reflection for the first time, and I realized I want to do something to give back. So I started researching nonprofits in the area that worked with kids. And I was like, I have some skills. Like, and I came in and I talked and I was like, hey, how can I get involved? And I met with the founder of that nonprofit, and she was like, oh, yeah, I would love to have you. Actually, we have a design team, and it would be really cool if you come in and you teach them about t-shirt design, and maybe even like we can start selling shirts at our events.
Mm.
And down the line, if it works out, maybe we can even teach them how to print.
Mm. Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that worked out. So I did that for a few years. And then that kind of branched off into a lot of things. Like that organization started working with juvenile facility, like juvenile detention facility. So I ended up branching off, and I actually worked with multiple groups, not just the design team,
Oh
with
wow.
that organization for a little bit. And then with COVID, everything kind of shut down, and then that company didn't continue operations after COVID.
Okay.
So yeah, it was really fun and rewarding, and I learned a lot about even myself working with those kids, you know? So I think when Garth presented to me the idea of working with youth champions, I was thinking, oh, cool. Well, maybe this is what's next.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great story, and I I kind of want to piggyback off the business thing that you were talking about. So if you could tell us a bit about where that idea came from. Did you see kind of an opportunity for it? Was it a partnership with someone, or kind of where did that come from? And how was it the years of being an entrepreneur and kind of those sleepless nights and having to grind it out and figure things out? If you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. So when I realized that I was not going to be a career Marine and I needed to figure something else out, I was a little bit lost for a sec. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I was about to go into my senior year of college, and I started dancing with the idea of pursuing a PhD in sociology. Sociology just covers a lot of like structural things in society, like what are the institutional components, like just so okay, we don't need to get into all that, but like so many different aspects that you can go into. And me being the type of thinker that I am, I'm always like, well, why is it this way? Why is it this way? And so I was entertaining that. And then my friend, he called me. He was actually my boss, but we stayed friends. He was my boss for a printing company I worked in college. And he said, hey, you want to have lunch one of these days? I have a proposition for you. And I was like, sure. So he was like, hey, I want to open a company because I know everything about it. And he said, and I need help. And you were my best employee back at the old shop. So do you want to go in on this with me? Because I know I can't do it by myself. And so I initially told him no. I was like, nah, it's not really something that I really care about, you know?
Yeah.
And then I went home and I sat on it and I kept thinking about it. And I think that it was the first time that the idea of me being a business owner even popped in my head. I had never thought about being a business owner before. And I decided, you know what? If I'm a business owner, I'm in control of the outcome.
Mm.
If I fail or succeed, it's going to be up to me.
Yeah.
And so I decided I wanted to give it a shot. So I called him back and was like, hey, let's talk again. And we agreed. We actually worked together for a year, but I realized that he and I had different long-term visions. And we're still friends now. And funny enough, he's one of my partners in Warrior Soul, but he's a silent partner.
Oh, okay.
So he's not really involved in the day-to-day stuff at all. He just kind of, yeah, more of a money partner.
Yeah.
And after the first year, I was like, hey man, I really think that I want to go off and just focus on apparel, because the paper printing side of the business is just kind of boring to me. I don't like doing people's business cards, and I don't want to do, all this manuals and brochures, and it's way more boring. So
Yeah.
I branched off on my own and I just did shirts for years. Actually, I'm in the process right now of getting out of that company. I'm selling it right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so, it's a shirt company, so it's not like anything crazy, but I'm selling all of the assets and all of like the accounts, because I have a fair amount of accounts, and I'm figuring out like in the negotiations of, if I retain an email with my name for that company, then like I can still technically handle the accounts, and then I'll get a commission, but I'm not going to have to do any of the work.
Oh.
So yeah, so it's
Yeah.
still going to be like a little like revenue stream on the side.
Yeah. No, that's really dope. I think you're the well, I mean, we've spoken to other people who have started like up organizations too, but this kind of printing thing is like the first thing that's different for me. I feel like I've spoken to a lot of people who have created like self development and self motivation companies, which are all very cool as well. But this is like a cool thing to speak to you about, kind of that entrepreneurship route that you pursued. So I appreciate you for that. But just I really want to jump into Warrior Soul Mindfulness and Combat Temple. So if you could tell me a bit about that, kind of Yeah, just tell me a bit about that, where that idea came from.
Yeah. Well, I've been an athlete my entire life, first of all. And there's a lot of things that have come very naturally to me. That because they come so naturally to me, I kind of maybe took them for granted for a long time. Like I didn't even know it was a skill or a gift or whatever you want to call it. And I just always thought, well, why can't they do it? Like they should be able to. Like I'm just a human. I'm not special, you know? Like special is such a loaded term. And I'm like I'm surprised not everyone can do it. And maybe, certain things they're going to be a little harder for someone, but then we get into my thinking brain, right? Well, why? Why is it harder? And if it's like a literal, physical, permanent difference, okay, then maybe you can't work around the permanent physical difference. If it's temporary, then that can be realigned, retrained, reinvented. So all of the physical things that I can do, if someone has a physical capable body, then they can do it. Mentally, same thing, right? Like if someone has brain damage, like actual brain damage where they're missing parts of the brain or certain whatever, okay, then maybe they're not going to be able to learn the same. Maybe there's going to be some things, but then if they don't, then rehabilitation is very possible. And we can have people think in new ways. And we can have people just expand that consciousness. And then from that expansion of consciousness, then what else can you do that you couldn't do before?
Hmm.
And so I have danced around with this for a really long time. So Warrior Soul is kind of like all of my life experiences coming together into one.
Hmm.
And if I'm being honest, when COVID hit, um, I pretty much lost everything. And I got to the point where I almost felt like I lost myself, like whatever was left. And I had a major reset. And so I started to during COVID thinking like, okay, I know I don't want to print shirts the rest of my life. What do I want to do? And then I started realizing like, well, I want to open my own gym. And at the time I was competing in bodybuilding. I hadn't even started doing yoga or martial arts yet. And then I got hurt. I was preparing for my next bodybuilding show and I had a minor pec tear, a pec minor, or sorry, whatever it's called. And then that set me back and I was thinking, okay, well, I'm not supposed to be lifting like that right now. And what can I do? Because I couldn't lift at all. And so then I went to try a martial arts class and it didn't hurt to punch. And I was like, cool, I'm going to keep doing this. And then the longer I did it, I realized, oh, wow, I need this. All of my pent up emotions and all of my unprocessed feelings that had just been lingering, I had a channel now to let them go. And there's something that was so unique to me about hitting something that I couldn't get anywhere else. And so, like I said, there'd been a fair amount of things, right, including like me, like almost losing everything, and martial arts turned out to be a very healing journey for me. And then in that same martial arts journey, I found yoga. And I started doing yoga and I started meditating and I started being able to slow everything down. And I realized, okay, hold on a minute. During a lot of my life, I have been hiding through my physical fitness. And I have been burying myself in the gym. And I started realizing, there's all these things people say, like, oh, gym is my therapy. Gym is my escape. And we can swap gym with anything. Escape means that you're not able to be present. So if you're using even something healthy like exercise as an escape, it became an unhealthy coping mechanism because it should not be an escape. your reality is what it is, and you need to be able to be present and accept the reality in order to thrive in that reality. And no one had ever taught me that. And that's what yoga was able to give me. So yoga was like, cool, just sit here. Why do you have to be doing something right now? Okay, cool. Now you don't want to sit here, then move into a different pose.
Mm.
Now that pose, oh, is that pose too hard? Then do another pose and come back to it. And that's what a yoga flow is. It's cycling through poses. And so in America, in the Western world, yoga is basically a stretching class, but yoga is actually a very spiritual thing. It's about going inward. And so I started to connect the dots between my yoga practice and my fighting practice. And I started to see that the other people at the school I trained at, they weren't getting better as fast as I was. And I started to see like, oh yeah, well, I'm getting a lot better really fast because of the stuff I'm doing outside of here. All of the extra movement practice that I do is helping me. And so I went from being a completely brand new guy recovering from a pec tear to one of the best students at that school, where it got to the point where it was just like I was always training with the coaches, with the people who were fighting actively, and then one of the coaches one day told me, he's like, do you want to do this fight that's coming up? Because there was like a bunch of people going from our school. And I was like, no, fighting's not for me. Like, I just like to train. And he said, out of everybody here, you're the only one that's ready. And you're the only one not going. Because it was like one of like the new fight stuff, like right for people's first times. And when he said that to me, I didn't believe him. I thought it was like, oh, he's just saying that, right? And then I slept on it and I texted him and I was like, okay, I'm down to do it. Just don't let me get beat up. And he was like, all right, I won't. He's like, I'll get you ready. I was like, cool. And so he and I started working. And then I won that fight. And there's something like that I unlocked in that fight where I was like, oh, wow, everything I've been doing, like in there, it was just me and that guy. Everything I've been doing is working. And so I told that coach that told me, you should do this. You're the only one that's ready. Let's go. I was like, hey, man, if I can figure out how to open our own school, will you be the coach? Because obviously I'm new, right? I'm not the fighting coach. I'm a student in fighting. And he was like, yeah. He's like, I'm down. Let's do it. And I was like, okay. And that was last February when I told him. No, not February. Sorry. It would have been like around March or April that I told him that. And let's just say that by November, we opened our school.
Wow.
And now we've been doing that full time. And so Warrior Soul, I didn't call it like Big Brawlers MMA or like any cheesy tough guy name like that, right? Like a temple is a place of, it's something sacred.
Yeah.
And so the way I see it is when we go and we step on the mats and we're either because we do yoga and we do fighting. It doesn't matter if you're doing yoga and you're just fighting the external world and just trying to be in one place, or if we're actually doing fighting drills and we're trying to do that, like all the movements properly. You're there to connect with your highest self and to learn to be in your sovereignty, because if you're in your sovereignty, then you are the master of your reality.
Mm.
If you can learn to block when someone's punching you, then in the outside world, what is the equivalent of someone punching you in the outside world? Right? Could it be like the friend that's always making fun of you because they're your friend? Well, how many times are you going to keep just taking those hits before you say something? Could it be that you have a job that you hate and your boss sucks? And are you taking punches because you're working a job that you hate when you can just get out of there? Or like, in what places can you take a bigger stand? So that's what Warrior Soul is about.
Wow.
And the movement is a vehicle, is what I say. The movement is a vehicle to our most authentic self.
Mm. Yeah. There's just so much that I'm picking up myself. So I'm like just trying to hear it, listen. I could see all the clips that we're gonna make off this conversation
Oh
later on.
yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, I guess now we're gonna jump into the second section of the interview,
Yeah.
which is focused on lessons, which I'm sure you have a lot. So I'm interested to hear your responses. Um, but we'll kick it off with something that I kind of like to ask all the interviewees. Have there been any influential books, resources, or mentors that have shaped your mindset and your personal development journey, and how have they impacted
Okay. Well, I'll pay tribute to youth champions right now because, um, like I mentioned, I was coming out of a pretty tough place, right out of COVID, and Garth giving me the opportunity to work with youth champions. I remember every time I taught class and every time I like did it, I was thinking, I have to implement this into my own life. There's like, I can't just sit here and read and talk about this curriculum and then not be about it myself.
you?
And that I think like was really helpful. So getting to work with youth champions, it's like, yes, I was one of the teachers, but in a sense, I was also a student in the sense that I'm like learning how to implement that into my own life so that I'm worthy of being that teacher.
And I remember that's actually something that I kind of want to comment on because I was just reading something last night that sometimes, like, I feel like I myself or we as like people can be teaching someone or maybe like a friend something, and then you realize like that's something you should be implementing in your own life. And I've had that realized too sometimes where I'm sitting down with a friend and just giving them advice, maybe they're going through something hard. And then I realize like, hey, that's something that how did I just spit all these words out that I know are good and going to help this person, and I haven't even implemented them myself, and I'm in a similar position to what they're dealing with, and that's something that I was just thinking about last night. So it's cool that you mentioned it too.
Yeah. Well, there's a very common phrase that we've probably all heard that comes to mind, and it's do as I say, not as I do. And every time I've ever heard someone say that, I don't really have respect for them. It's like, then why do I listen to you? Like, why am I going to listen to you?
Yeah,
You know, if if you're telling me to do something you're not doing yourself, then it's like, okay, cool. Like, then how much do you really believe in it?
yeah,
And I think that it took me a while to like really integrate that. And it's an active part of integration daily in my life.
yeah. And so the next question on the lesson section that I have is,
Yeah.
how do you approach self-reflection and self-awareness in your personal growth journey?
Cool. So there's a practice that I have where I allow myself to be a witness of my life. So we can even bring it down to right now. If I am a witness of my own life in this moment, what is happening? I'm on a call with you on behalf of Youth Champions because you want to know about me so that you can put it on a website to teach others. I have to really take that in and understand that I have apparently gotten to a place in my life where that's what's happening. And that's just added data to like, yeah, bro, there's some things that you have figured out that are worth listening to. Where I can also like the flip side of that would be like, cool, they just called me and they wanted to talk, whatever. And when I was younger, I was a lot more like that.
Mm.
But yeah, whatever. What do you want? Okay, cool, let's do that. Okay. And then I would never register it.
Yeah,
And so the part of like the not registering it, it doesn't really help you continue to grow if you're not taking accountability over what's even happening. Because it's like, let's say that for 10 years, people keep telling you and like wanting you for one thing, and you have never thought about them. 10 years go by and you still think you're in year one, and where you're operating from year one still, where instead you can be like, hey, this keeps happening. It must be because of these things. Cool. So now that I know this is part of me, what can I do with that? So I do that daily with anything that's going on. Like even I started playing music, and I have mostly played music by myself. A couple weekends ago, I was invited to this event, and there was people there, and I played music with a group for the first time. I had never done that before, and I was able to improvise and solo on the guitar, and I was like really like part of the group. And I told them, I was like, I'd never played with other people before. They couldn't believe it.
Mm.
And I walked into a music store to get my thing for my guitar the other day, and I talked to one of the teachers because I'm finally in a place where I want to learn, like from a teacher to help. And he was like, "Yeah, let's see what you got." And I played, and apparently I'm a lot better at music than I realized. And I had to sit with this because he said, "Those are really cool." He's like, then he picked up the guitar and he tried to copy what I did, and he's like, "I don't even know what you did there." And for a teacher who says he's been playing guitar, he's pretty old, by the way. He's like probably in his 60s.
Mm.
And he's been playing since he was 5, he said. And for him to pick up a guitar and be like, "Oh, what was that?" And he's like trying to like, and it was really close, but it wasn't quite what I did.
Yeah.
And of course, he only heard it once, so granted. But I had to sit with that and be like, okay, cool, I guess I am a musician.
Yeah.
And so you see, like, if I wrote that off and I'm like, oh no, I just started playing music, I'm not that good yet. No, I need to accept, yeah, you know what? I have become a musician now. I can play things with people that have been playing. All of those people at the event had been playing since they were kids. I'm the only one who started 2 years ago.
Mm.
So that's what I do daily.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I'm learning a lot of stuff that I also need to implement myself as a younger person. Um, so I guess a final question that I have on the lesson section. So are
Yeah,
there any common misconceptions or myths about personal development that you would like to debunk?
I think that I think the main thing I would like to share at this time is that growth is evolutionary and it continues to evolve over and over and over. So I meet people who they think that because they're really good at something or they've achieved a bunch of stuff, like they made it.
Mhm.
And so, okay, you're going to tell me that at any number, right? 30, 40, 50 years old, whatever, like you peaked. So you just chose that you peaked right now.
Mm.
You know, I'm not cool with that. Because if I peak right now, that means it's all downhill from here.
Mm.
And I'm going to continue growing. I lay my head on the pillow knowing that if I died tomorrow, I still did everything that I could do today, up to this day. And that if I'm still alive the next day, I'm going to continue to grow. And the other thing, like the last piece to that, to give some very like important context, is growth should not be adding to your stress or your anxiety.
Mm.
If your growth plans induce stress or anxiety, you're on the wrong path. That's not growth. Your growth should be about you, you know, through a way of compassion, self-love, and respect.
Mm. That's yeah, that's I can see the clips coming after this, like all the everything that's gonna be shared. That's just a really I think as I reflect on like what you say and like the stuff about self compassion is something that I personally, as I sit here reflecting from you and your experiences, I haven't necessarily like went through. Like I feel like I've been in that position where sometimes, like right now, I leave to New York tomorrow, so I work in finance in New York right now, and I've dealt with a lot of stuff like personal anxiety that I've dealt with from leaving LA. Like I'm born and raised in LA, single mother in LA.
Yeah.
So I've just been with her my whole life, and then I kind of detached for these couple of months. Um, and I've finally gotten over like the anxiety of it, but last summer was really like tough. Um,
Mm.
and as I hear you mention the fact that sometimes we need to work on our own selves and care about our own selves, that's something that I completely probably just started doing in like February, like especially like the physical training. Like I right now I've been going to the gym a lot, and I started like doing cardio. And I real before I felt like I used to do cardio just because it was kind of a check mark that I needed to check off every day. But I started like just sitting there, well, not sitting there, but running there without headphones and just like thinking for like 50 minutes straight or whatever I do of cardio. And that was like, holy shit, the things that I like can think about when I'm just like deplug from the phone because I'm 20, and sometimes I feel so consumed by my phone, and it's so tough sometimes trying to figure out like, hey, you need to like just get away from that, focus on what relieves your anxiety. So I've a lot of stuff that you've mentioned today, even though this is an interview that's going to go up for everyone else, is stuff that I'm going to implement myself. So thank you.
Yeah. And obviously, if you ever want to come up to Santa Barbara and train with us one day, let me know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'll have that down on my checklist as something that I want to do.
Yeah, cool.
So I guess now we're entering into the final section, which is the youth champion section. Um, so I know you mentioned that you were a teacher and a mentor for about 3 years now, you were saying.
Mhm.
So can you tell me a bit about that experience of being a teacher and a mentor to youth? We work a lot with underrepresented or underprivileged youth. Um, what is kind of, from your perspective, the goal that you like to achieve every day or every session when you meet with the kids?
To be, what I tried to do every time that I showed up to class was to be my most authentic self. Because I understood that at the end of the day, if I didn't do that, then I'm not actually setting a good example for the class. And so it's like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to talk about this. And even like the way I taught class, yes, there's a curriculum. And so it's like, if I read it word for word, or I like try like too hard for it to be a certain way, then I'm not actually being authentic. So I would also like heavily focus on the concepts. Well, what are the concepts? And I would also gauge it based on who was in my class. So I would think, okay, I'm I'm gonna just do it this way in the beginning. I'm gonna see who participates, and then I was adjusting based on who was in my class and how they each responded because they're all very unique, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I also focused a lot on like encouraging them to participate more and like explaining to them like how it relates. Like one of the examples I can use is like I told them, this is your chance to practice raising your hand and using your voice. If you can raise your hand and use your voice in my class, you can raise your hand and use your voice anywhere. So you're going to be in college and you're going to have participation points.
Yeah.
And if you are terrified to raise your hand for fear of being wrong or fear of being heard, then you're going to wish you had shaken that off sooner. And this is your opportunity to do it right now.
Yeah.
So I always tried to give them like, not just tell them you have to participate, but tell them why. Why does it benefit you to participate? And then after that, if they still didn't want to participate, okay, I mean, I can't force you, but then I would have my like front runners in the class and, they would always raise their hand.
Yeah. And so I kind of want to go through these and ask you from another youth champions kind of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
From your point of view, what is the most valuable aspect current champions can take from the programs or speaking with people like you and apply into the real world?
I think the curriculum's gold. The curriculum is legitimately really good. I wouldn't have taught it for the years that I did, and I would still be with youth champions if I wasn't launching my own youth program.
Yeah.
So I think that anybody who's in the program right now, just figure out how to implement all of it into your life somehow. And like, be excited about it. Because I also said this in my class. There are very famous speakers that make money because adults identify that, like, okay, now I'm stuck. Even if I've been successful, right? Some people they get pretty successful. Why do they plateau? Because of blockages in their head. So they go and pay somebody like Tony Robbins or whatever. Hey, what do I need to do? Like, to help me. And it's like, now you're mind hacking. And it's like, dude, you're in high school and you were just given a bunch of stuff that if you just run with this, you're not going to have to go pay Tony Robbins later. Results may vary. But like I said, there is a lot in the Youth Champions curriculum that is really, really powerful stuff.
Yeah. And just now that we've reached the end of the conversation, I want to ask you something. So to wrap it up, just kind of one thing, statement, or whatever you'd like to share for whoever is watching this, not necessarily a certain profile. Maybe this isn't a kid, this could be an adult. Just one thing you would like to leave at the end of the interview.
Yeah. I say this in my class at my martial arts school all the time. I think I'm just going to say that here too. I think that what our world needs the most is to remember their true self. That true self being who they were before the world started telling them who they're supposed to be. And that alone can bring a lot of healing to this planet.
Oh, that was a great way to wrap it up, Albert. So I really appreciate that, the conversation that we've had, all that I've personally learned about yourself and that everyone else who's watching these interviews. And again, this will be shared on YouTube for the people who are watching this on YouTube, also across Instagram, and soon to come for the current champions and future champions within our LMS platform, which is going to be kind of a learning platform for all of you guys. But again, this was a conversation with Albert, who worked with Youth Champions previously, had that experience, and we hope you guys found this conversation interesting. And Albert, I really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone who watched.
Yeah. Thank you, Eddie. It was nice meeting you.
Thank you.
See you.